I did a bit of searching around about the Oath Keepers, which is what would you call it? They say they defend the Constitution, and they came into being in 2009, just after Obama got into office. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think suddenly these defenders of the Constitution were really actually about freaking out because a black man got into office. Not that that black man threatened anything, and that Obama actually was, he described himself as a moderate Republican, and he kept all the wars going and all of that. So, but the fact that he was a black man, I think, made this group, the Oath Keepers, spring into being. And today, I think it was today, Rhodes Stewart is, I think, the founder of the Oath Keepers. He said on Twitter, I think it was Twitter, "The first shot has been fired, brother. Civil war is here, right now. We'll give Trump one last chance to declare this a Marxist insurrection and suppress it as his duty demands. If he fails to do his duty, we will do ours." And then he has in quotes, "against all enemies, foreign and domestic." Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, I don't know, toxic masculinity gets a bit tiresome, and this is just an expression of this, as well as white supremacy, because this is what it's all about. They're like the black shirts in relation to Mussolini, putting down socialists and all of that, and it's also like the brown shirts that helped Hitler. And if people want to look into what happened to the brown shirts, Hitler ended up executing all of them after he got into power because they were a threat to his power. And that's something that the Oath Keepers might like to keep in mind. There's something else that they also, that made him, I think this might have actually been a few days ago when Aaron Danielson was killed. That's when he posted that.
The shooter took off running, and it takes a second for you to process everything that happened. Did he just shoot at me? Okay. I'm okay. Turn over, and Jay's dead. Because he believes something different. Jay's not a racist. He's not a xenophobe or whatever label. He's not an ist or an ism. He's an independent man. He's a good man. He didn't do anything to earn a bullet in the chest.
If you could ask anything right now, Donald Trump, what would it be?
Send troops.
So this is funny. One person from their side is killed, and that's a terrible thing, anybody getting killed. But one of theirs gets killed, and he wants to get Trump to send in the troops. There's been at least 73 people killed by far-right white nationalist groups since Heather Heyer was mowed down by a white supremacist in a car in Charlottesville. And one person gets killed, and he wants Trump to send in the troops. I mean, I'm sorry. They're looking for any sort of excuse at all to put down people who have a different political position to them. That's really what it is. So Stuart Rhodes said on Twitter, he said, "Our condolences and prayers go out to the family and friends of Aaron J. Danielson and to Patriot Prayer." That's another white supremacist group. A white nationalist group. We fully support President Trump declaring this an insurrection and calling the National Guard into federal service to defend the rights of the people in Oregon. So Kyle Rittenhouse was still running around free. He passed by the police. This is Kyle Rittenhouse, the one that murdered those two unarmed protesters. One of them was Anthony Huber, and the other one was, his last name was Rosenbaum. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his first name. He murdered both of them, and then he put his hands up in front of the police cars, and they all just ignored him, and he had his assault rifle on him, and he walked away. And he slept in his own bed, and I think he handed himself in the next morning, and he's actually sent a message to the Oath Keepers, sort of like as if they're all buddies, and the Oath Keepers think he's a real hero.
Our effort to free Kyle. We have John Pierce, lead attorney for Kyle Rittenhouse, and we have Kyle Rittenhouse direct from county jail. Guys, what would you like to say to the fans?
I just want to thank every single one of you from the bottom of my heart for the underlining support. It's just amazing. I want to thank all of you for the mail I've been receiving. It's been really helpful. I just want to let you all know that I'm going to be out of here soon, and stay strong, and I hope to see you guys soon.
And I want to say that this is 100% self-defense. If this is not self-defense for Kyle Rittenhouse under these circumstances, then no one can protect themselves, no one can protect their family, and no one can protect their country. This is a watershed moment in American history. A very bright line has been crossed. The right to self-defense is a God-given right, and we are not going to allow a prosecutor in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to take it away from Kyle Rittenhouse. Thank you so much for all the support.
But there's a lot of those white nationalist groups that think Kyle Rittenhouse is a hero. Why? Because he killed leftists, and that's all you need to do to be a hero, is kill leftists, kill BLM protesters, whether they're, even though they're unarmed. That makes you a hero. So, for all they go on about defending the Constitution and all of this, they don't care about free speech. They care about their own free speech, but they don't care about the free speech of protesters who are protesting against anti-democratic laws and also against the killing of black people just because they're black by the police, which is a frequent thing. They don't care about that, which says a lot about them. They can pretend all they like that what they're interested in is protecting the Constitution, but really what it's all about is they're protecting racial hierarchy in the United States. They want white people to be supreme. They feel threatened by the thought of white people not being a majority. And that's going to, eventually, white people are not going to be a majority, and that really freaks them out. They also are often misogynists and think women, like the Proud Boys, they think that women belong in the kitchen, and they're totally anti-feminist. All these people, all these different white supremacist groups are all sort of misogynist, really, and racist and Islamophobic. And it goes on. They might pretend they aren't, and they pretend they make up all sorts of excuses, but they really are all those things. And it's all about racial hierarchy. And this is what, I don't know much about thenewrepublic.com, but this is what they said about Rhodes' comments about putting down the insurrection, in quotes. Rhodes' comments are hardly a surprise, but they are explicit confirmation that America's militia movement is a vehicle for far-right forces to coalesce and coordinate armed pushback against protesters of anti-democratic policies in the US. They confirm that these armed, conspiratorially minded men's support and defend the Constitution, in quotes, rhetoric was empty air, vacuous word salad meant to paper over the violence these men thirst for. They confirm that, in the end, America's militia movement is little more than the heir to the white vigilantes that preceded it, the white rifle clubs and night riders terrorizing black Americans, the settler colonial vigilante groups leading America's ethnic cleansing campaigns across the American West. These supposed, quote, oath keepers, end quote, are now fascisti for a would-be American Duce, black shirt shock troops, in the campaign to maintain the nation's racial hierarchy, no matter how much bloodshed that goal requires. Trump should declare a nationwide insurrection to be in effect and call all the National Guard units into federal service under his command and use them to suppress the insurrection in the streets. This is what he told the New Republic. And when I asked Rhodes whether such orders should be limited to Portland, my hometown, where my family and friends and loved ones aplenty still live, or whether Trump should consider directing such forces elsewhere, Rhodes was clear nationwide. So I think Kyle Rittenhouse is really what you might say a distilled version of all these different groups. There's been like about 73 people murdered now by white supremacist shooters in the last 2 years since Heather Heyer was killed in Charlottesville when that man ran into them. That white supremacist ran her over and ran over some other protesters and killed her. So there's been 73 murders since then by white supremacists. Just in the last 2 years, apparently, according to an article I read. But do you hear the likes of Rhodes Stewart saying anything? Or is it Stuart Rhodes? I'm sorry, I get his name. I haven't taken too much notice of his name. So apologies for that. Anyway, so according to this article, he doesn't seem to care at all about all these different people that are killed. He cares about this one guy, Aaron Danielson, who was shot by someone who said they were anti-fascist, although the media likes to say he said, I'm 100% anti-Antifa. I watched that. I watched him being interviewed, this guy, I forget his name, a couple of days before he shot Aaron Danielson in Portland. Supposedly he shot him. I mean, sometimes I really wonder about these different things. It's sometimes very convenient when this sort of thing happens, because it gives these people don't really need an excuse to kill protesters, but as you can tell by the number of people that have been killed so far in the last couple of years, but it's like a little firing gun for them. They think that that's all the excuse they need. And sometimes one has to wonder about that kind of thing, because now that man who killed Aaron Danielson is dead, so nobody can sort of interview him or ask him anything. But it looks like he probably killed Aaron Danielson, and so this is the excuse that people like this guy needs from the Oath Keepers to then declare war on the rest of anybody who has a different political opinion to him, which means anybody who is for Black lives, who is against anti-democratic laws, who is possibly socialist or is for social equality and equity. He is against that. He's for it if it's for white people, but he is against it if it's for anybody else. I like what Mike Preisner says here. Mike Preisner is from the Empire Files. He said, Trump is definitely a fascist in his personal ideology, as are his army of cop and vigilante supporters. But Trump coming to power and everything his administration and his armed enforcers have been able to do with that power is just plain old capitalist democracy. So that constitution that he is supposed to be protecting is really only for his group, which is white people. And in some ways it's funny, it's not surprising, because the Constitution is problematic and the Second Amendment was created, I've mentioned this before, the small militias actually became the KKK, which then became the police. The small militias were there to put down uprising slaves and to kill indigenous people and steal their land. That's what the small militias were all about. And that's what the Second Amendment is basically about. So it's not surprising that somebody from the Oath Keepers would want to protect and defend the Constitution and the so-called enemies, foreign and domestic. I bet you they don't complain about the wars overseas. I don't think I've heard that. This is an interesting thing about white supremacists. You don't find that they're often not anti-imperialists, or they might say that. They might give verbal, maybe say some things like they might say they want Trump to not start any new wars, and yet Trump has been escalating all the current wars, and there's been terrible carnage. He's also participated in the genocide in Yemen. And he's continuing on these wars and escalating them. But apparently that's okay. Just don't start any new ones. Wait until if he gets back into office, and you'll see some new ones. Because he doesn't have to pretend to please his base at all. And the Democrats are totally on board with any war that's brought in front of them. So that's a scary thought. Or he might even cause a war before this election, because that always ups the popularity of presidents, apparently. It's not surprising that the Oath Keepers and the other white supremacists who are always talking about the Constitution and how important it is, and then they always pretend to care about the government starting to do undemocratic things towards the public, and therefore they're going to step in and defend the public, when really the exact thing that the Black Lives Matter protests, the protests against the killings of black people just because they're black, basically, that's actually something the government is doing. Really, the government these various state governments are allowing, and they're not doing anything about that. And ultimately, there's something which these people just ignore, is that the NDAA, Obama actually, helped enforce the NDAA, which is actually where you're able to arrest American citizens and detain them without counsel. And the government's even legally allowed to kill Americans under the NDAA.
I rise in reluctant opposition to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll be voting on today. The bill does include provisions that are vital to our national defense. but it also includes provisions that present a false choice between our safety and our values. Section 1021 would authorize the indefinite military detention of all terrorism suspects, allowing the United States to detain an individual, some of whom may be innocent, without charge or trial during this endless war on terrorism, undermines our most defining principles as a nation of individual freedom and justice for all.
That's a law that Chris Hedges actually sued the Obama administration over and won, and then they overturned it. Where are these people when some law like that comes in? Where are they? They're nowhere. Did they say anything when that happened? So it's all just BS. The way they go on. If they really care, if they really, where they proclaim that they're armed and everything because the government might get out of hand, and yet the government brings in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. They can do that. They can arrest people, detain them without counsel, and then they can even assassinate. They've assassinated Anwar al-Awlaki and his son. His son was 16. They were both American citizens. They were assassinated by drones. And here we are with Julian Assange in a Belmarsh prison in the UK. And do the Oath Keepers talk about that? I mean, the US government is basically, he's being held there on behalf of the US government for the crime, in quotes, of journalism, basically. And so these Oath Keepers, did they complain about the government interfering in press freedom? No, of course not. So it's all just a joke, really. So it's just, these people are just full of nonsense. Like I've said before, I wish these people would just be honest and just say, really, what they want. They want the white race to reign supreme in the United States, and they'd rather just see everybody leave or kill them. They're like Kyle Rittenhouse. They're just distilled into Kyle Rittenhouse, who was a misogynist, who was beating a young woman, punching her repeatedly in the back. He's sort of almost, I think he's really got some things wrong with him, but he's definitely what all those groups would like to do, go around killing protesters, leftist protesters. Killing, and these BLM protests, these protests are actually much more. They're much more than just protesting against the killing of black people. It's about economic injustice and all sorts of things now. And it's all related anyway. All these groups hold up Kyle Rittenhouse because he went out and shot people, unarmed people, and killed them. And that's what they'd all like to do. And when Trump gets in, if he gets in, it's going to be scary because they're already emboldened by Trump. The United States and their policies and the 14 characteristics of fascism that already exist in the United States, it's all propped up by the duopoly. So the Democratic Party is just as responsible for this outcome, the economic injustice, the poverty and all of this, the lack of response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Both those parties are horrific in that regard. And they're just going to keep ignoring the calls for these various things. They're going to keep, the Democratic Party is going to keep placating the masses and saying BS until they get, until the next election. But they're all responsible for this. Both parties, both major parties are responsible for this. What's going to happen if Trump gets in again, which it could possibly be the case. I think it's very much looking like that. Despite him doing a terrible job with this pandemic, he's still going to manage to get in because look who they put forward, Joe Biden, who's cognitively challenged.
We're going to survive all the way through this whole thing.
So it could get nasty with these people like the Oath Keepers, and there's dozens of white nationalist groups all over the United States. Dozens. Actually, probably about 50 or more. They could all just come together because really the thing that they have in common is fear of being a small demographic in the country. Fear of white people becoming a minority group, basically. And so they want to do something about it before that happens. And they usually hate trans people. They usually hate just LGBT people in general. They hate black people. They hate people of color. They hate feminists, all those things that fascism tends to be about. They have no problem with warring and imperializing, so that's just fine. You know, they see socialists as an enemy. Isn't that amazing? Socialism, which is about equality for people, all people. See, that's the problem. They don't want equality for all people. They're full of shite, basically. Absolutely. And they're cowards. They're usually all cowards. They need a big gun to make them feel manly. But all they want to do is shoot people, basically. I mean, they've been shooting innocent animals in forests and stuff like that with ridiculously high-powered telescope lenses, just like the cowards that they are. And now they want to shoot people too. And sorry for anybody who happens to be a hunter and thinks that's a fun thing to do as a vegan. I think it's just really unfortunate, but it's not surprising because we view animals as resources, so it's not surprising people think that's okay. But really, I mean, what is, what could you call something where you're using a high-powered telescope and killing animals that are just basically, roaming about? We don't need animal products at all. We don't. A lot of this really is about posturing too. It's just toxic masculinity, and it's about posturing and trying to feel like you're all powerful. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. They're not going to, if Trump doesn't do this, we're going to do that. I mean, they've been itching to shoot people for a long time. It's just sad.